Hello and welcome back to my channel. In this video, we are going to talk about the finale of season 1 of Loki. In particular, we are going to be talking about the philosophical conundrum that is brought about by Kang the Conqueror in terms of whether or not they want freedom or they want order. In my mind, the debate is freedom worth the chaos that it breeds and the war that will inevitably come from there, or is having order just okay, despite the fact that no one has any freedom left at that point. But before we get into that, let's start with Kang the Conqueror himself. So in this final episode, we are introduced with a new character, which in most cases would seem like the worst possible thing to do. I mean, why would you bring about a new character at the very end of a show, at the very last episode? It doesn't really make any sense. So I was like, okay, that's a little bit weird. Let's see how they go about it. But they spent the entire episode not only explaining this man's perspective and point of view, but also why he does exactly what he does. They showed us a lot more insight that many characters would have gotten over the course of an entire season of a show in just this 40-minute period, because that's all they focused on for pretty much the entire episode. Now, the actual character of Kang that we get, or at the very least this variant or version of Kang, is not the Conqueror. I mean, he's been called that, it seems, but to me, this Kang is more like, I mean, it's Kang Light, I guess you could say, because he himself says that the versions of him that will come about from the multiverse are going to be, I mean, there might be some good ones, but there are going to be versions of him that are much, much worse. And I wonder if at the end we're going to have to see Kang's fight against Kang. Like, how are they going to go about doing that? Is it going to be different people playing different versions of this role, similar to how like Sylvie and Loki are different actors? Things like that is what I'm concerned about, or not concerned about, but like thinking about. Like, is that how it's going to end up being? Are we going to have a bunch of Kangs fight alongside the Avengers and everyone in a final battle on this thing? Like, I don't know. But I thought it was very interesting that the way that they introduced this character was a version that wasn't like a very dominant, or like a character that didn't seem like he was very willing to fight, more someone that was very high in intellect and capable of outmaneuvering or outthinking other characters. And I think that that was just very fascinating to me. It does make sense considering Kang is this version of Kang says that they were all scientists traveling through the multiverse, and that ended up breaking out into a war, stuff like that. I think that that does make sense, and I wonder how different the other variants of this character are going to end up being. And that's just very fascinating to me. In particular, with this version of Kang, he seems to be, I believe he said, eons old or millions of years old, whatever. And despite that, he's still a human being, so I'm assuming he's like somehow stopped the aging process for his body. And that's just very interesting to me as well, because I'm assuming that same technology is used on the TVA, because that's exactly what what Renslayer says to Morbius. Not Morbius, Mobius. Morbius is a very different character. To Mobius when they're having that conversation in their office. Now, considering in particular the multiversal war, I found this very fascinating to me, because the way that Kang describes it, it seems like he is the only reason why the multiversal war happens, and it's all because of him. There's no other people that are like the big players of the multiversal war, but it's really just different versions of Kang. And the fact that they're going to be branching out now is very fascinating to me, like, because clearly Kang's going to be the next big villain, but why would it just be Kang? Why aren't there other people that are capable of, you know, surpassing Kang and also traveling through the multiverse and ending up causing trouble? Why is it only just Kang that seems to be the one typically to be doing this? And I think that in particular, when we move forward in the MCU, we might end up seeing Kang, we might end up seeing other characters other than Kang also be involved in the multiversal war, despite what had happened previously in the last war. I also think that this is very interesting, but because it's bringing about this idea that you have the multiverse and then you have the war that inevitably comes about, which I guess leads to something along the lines of an apocalypse at that point. It's kind of like the end of everything that ended up culminating in a single reality being created at that point. And I think now that we're delving back into the multiverse with infinite possibility once more, it reminds me a lot of what happened previously with I think DC did it this way, where it was like you had a multiverse, then it got brought down into a singular universe. I don't know if, and then it ended up being the multiverse again, but I don't know if Marvel ever did it in that particular way, where you had like some event that destroyed the multiverse and the end result was a singular universe. I don't know if that was ever done before, so I find it very interesting that they're going that route because it's very fascinating to me. One of the talking points that Kang brings about during his conversation with Sylvie and Loki is the idea that he is pretty much like the devil you know, and if he dies, then that brings about an infinite number of different devils, so to speak, or different characters that could end up being far, far worse than this man here. And this is partly one of the big conundrums of this episode. It's, do you just deal with this one man who has pretty much taken away the freedom of everyone in the timeline and has made it such that no branches in reality and time can ever occur, because he wants to prevent the bloodshed of a future multiversal war? But my question here is, does he not just do the same thing that would have happened otherwise? The whole idea with the multiversal war is that all these different timelines ended up being at war, but instead of that, he's just killing them all off right away. It's not really any different. Either way, you do kill all these different realities. And I also think that it's very interesting that he himself considers or mentions that he could be considered a devil, so to speak, because at the start of the series, we do have Sylvie, who is referred to as the devil by this small child before his timeline gets pruned. And yeah, I thought that was just a little bit interesting to me because that popped up in my brain at that time, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool that like he is referring to himself as the devil, whereas previously at the start of the story we considered this Loki variant of Sylvie to have been that same type of a character. Personally, to me, I think it's just going to be cool to see the multiverse, which I think just about everyone who's watched this show would agree. They went the more fun route. That's definitely where it is. Is it going to be better for the characters involved? I really don't know. I very much doubt it, but I think it's going to go for some cool stories and we're going to have some fun with it. In particular, I do think that it's going to be really cool to see what happens in season 2 with this, because now we have to deal with the fallout of these consequences. Sylvie, ultimately, you could say that she made the wrong choice. From the perspective of the actual MCU character's perspective, she screwed up. She killed the one person holding everything together, and it was much better than the alternative at that point. On the other hand, you do understand Sylvie's perspective. So going into that, let's talk about both Sylvie and Loki's perspectives in this episode and why they end up doing the things that they do, or at the very least, why I think that they do the things that they do. In particular, with Loki, he believes that Kang is telling the truth, which we end up finding out he is, and that's because Loki is so used to deceiving and lying himself that he is very careful and understands that this man is clearly telling the truth. He actually believes this person, and it's because of that skill in deception that he understands that this is a very real possibility and a very real threat. As such, this is not a choice, a decision that can be made lightly, and the alternative to him is that him and Sylvie take over and make sure things go about as according to planned, and that maybe they have a little bit more control. And even then, if they're in charge, maybe they can let some realities keep going, and why not just kill the versions of Kang that exist? That to me is definitely a possibility. Why don't they just do that? They could, make sure the timelines branch off decently, but maybe not get it as crazy as it ends up happening afterwards, to infinite possibilities basically. But allow different possibilities to spring out here and there, and then like with those each possibilities, they say, okay, this is the version of Kang right here. He needs to be stopped, or we need to analyze him. Like, is he going to be good or bad for him to continue on in this timeline? Like, what's going to happen from there? I think that could be very, very, that could have been a very, very good choice. And I think that's what's going through Loki's head. It's like the two of us have gone through exactly what the bad part of the TVA is. They were removed from their timeline. Their entire reality shattered and is destroyed because and now they have nowhere to go back to, because Kang and the TVA decided that his timeline was not the correct flow of time. That being said, does that mean that they are in fact the correct people to do the job? I mean, maybe so, because they've both killed so many people. They're not self-righteous in the idea that they are somehow any better than someone like Kang. They killed people to achieve their own ends, and I would say that Kang, I mean, is probably in some ways a better person than the other two, because he did what he had to do in order to save the world, almost. Like, he wanted to save all of time. He didn't want another war and all this just death and destruction to happen, so he decided that this was the best way, from what he saw, to alleviate that in order to prevent another multiversal war. On the other hand, you have Sylvie. Sylvie has gone through the pain and suffering of being a variant on her own for far, far longer than Loki. Loki's only been here for like maybe a month at the most, something like that. I'm not clear on how long this timeline actually is for this series, but it's really not that long of a time frame. And she sees and understands that the pain and suffering that the variants have to go through a lot more than Loki does. I mean, Loki does have an understanding, but Sylvie sees what happens when you survive and what exactly that means for the future. And so Sylvie's idea is that, look, I've been trying to get revenge this entire time, and I don't think I can trust this man. There's no reason for me to trust the person that's caused all the pain and suffering for probably thousands of years. I mean, I think she even says that she's been a variant for pretty much Loki's entire span of existence, so she's probably older than Loki in truth. And on the opposite side of that, you have Loki, who cannot be trusted. That's what they say. Sylvie cannot trust, and Loki cannot be trusted, and that puts them at odds. They cannot work with each other at this point. Though they want to be on the same side, and they wish they agreed here, they have to clash. And ultimately, Loki is the one that says, look, I trust you, or I want to work with you. I don't want to attack you. I'm not doing this to gain power. And despite that, I don't know if Sylvie really believes him at the end. She believes that Loki is only doing this for power. Even if she believes him, she can't say that with absolute certainty, that this is not just a power grab for our variant. And that's really, really sad. And as a result, she pushes him back into the TVA, saying that, thinking that, look, I'm not going to kill him, but I can't trust him to help me in this decision. And we end up having her kill Kang the Conqueror. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. And almost immediately, we see the consequences of these actions. Sylvie made the wrong choice. I mean, I guess she finds out at that point. I don't know if that's exactly why she's crying there, but she was wrong. I mean, she did not believe that killing Kang would be that bad, that so many things would go wrong after that. And maybe she does realize when the infinite branches start to emerge, but it's really Loki that notices. As soon as he gets back, he tries and I mean, he waits around sitting in his sorrow. And then he realizes, no, I have to go to work. I have to stop this. There is a monster, or a whole infinite number of these same person, this same monster that's going to be born from these actions. And he has to go to work. But ultimately, he gets another blow at the very end of this show, and that is, he's no longer known. We are no longer in the TVA. I think it was called the TSA or TSV or something like that. Wow. So I'm confused by this just a little bit, because I assumed that the TVA existed outside of the timeline, but not only that, I assumed that well, they would at least remember what had happened. But I'm assuming what happened here is that the TVA must exist somewhere along the timeline at some point. And on top of that, you must have had Kang take over the TVA much earlier on and alter the path of everyone that was in the TVA. That's what I think might have happened. Not too sure about that, but ultimately we get like we basically get Loki getting punched in the face and then punched in the gut. Like, he is just down at this point, and that is how they end the show. I am super excited to see what happens in season 2 of this show. I'm very glad that they decided to tell us that there would be a season 2, but yeah, we're just gonna have to wait and see as to what the impact of this is. We're definitely gonna see it in Multiverse of Madness. Hopefully we're gonna see it in Spider-Man. I'm assuming that that's gonna be I think at this point we can safely assume that there are gonna be multiple versions of Peter Parker in that film, or at the very least that is my hope. I think that would be awesome. Well, yeah, that's all I really have to say for this video. I loved this series overall. I think that like this has been a very solid episode. I think 1, 6, and 5 are the 3 of my favorite episodes of this series so far. I just thought those 3 did such a good job of, like, in terms of pacing, in terms of storytelling. There were just a lot of fun and a lot of interesting aspects of those episodes. So yeah, I really enjoyed this ride. And I think that this is probably my favorite. I think that Falcon and the Winter Soldier is probably my 3rd favorite. WandaVision, I think I'd have to rewatch it to really see which one I like better, just because it's been so long at this point, but I definitely think that Loki was a worthwhile watch. Let me know your thoughts of this video as well as this episode overall in the comments below. If you liked this video, please like it and share with other people as well. And finally, if you want to see more from me, please subscribe for more videos from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.